All right, folks, welcome back to part 2 of our 4L80E rebuild and reassembly. We left off with this step here after we put the intermediate clutch piston spring and retainer assembly back on. So now we're going to pick it up over here. We want to install the new direct clutch housing oil seals onto the center support. We've got 4 rings here that go on. This is a later style model, so these are not Teflon rings that have to be sized. They have little openings and they can open on and slide on. And we're going to use Transgel. J36850 is just Transgel, right? Red, gold, whatever you have, blue. And let's take a look in our pack from our rebuild kit. And so I think it's probably these 4 722 ones here, but we can verify in our parts list. Take a quick look here and see, we're looking for part 639. Part 639 is 242.05.722 for this particular year, and that is exactly what we've got. So let's go and fish them out from inside here. And that looks like them right there. 1, 2. And there's actually a couple of different ones, so we want to make sure we get the right ones. I think it's these smaller ones. Just give me a moment, guys. 3, 4. Yep, that would be it, because there are 4 of those and 2 of these. All right, we're just going to make a notation that we got those and used them, so they consumed those 4 parts. And these guys, just like when we took them off, right? So they're just opened like that. We're just going to open them slightly, and we're going to work them down into position. You can either do the top one first or the bottom one first. It doesn't matter. You just want to make sure you don't damage them. All right, that's 3. Last one. All right, so I just want to make sure they're in all the way around. And then, like the service manual recommended, I'm going to use a little bit of Transgel to keep them in position until we get the rest of the assembly done. After this, we'll move on to the next step. Okay, next up, we're going to do the reaction drum and carrier assembly. So we're going to take our cleaned off and restored 666 part, and we're going to take our new 670, our 662 shaft, all cleaned up and ready to go. And guys, just like I mentioned in the previous video, you're going to want to make sure you've sized for your bushings on these parts. Here's our old 670 that we just had for reference. And we got a replacement. These are discontinued now, but I tracked one down. 862-3212 is the correct snap ring for this. Now, for example, like here, sometimes you have to dress these bushings up. So take this output shaft for a second, this 671 part. You just want to make sure that, it fits. It should be a snug fit. Otherwise, what's the point of replacing the bushing? But it's got to fit, right? Same with these this shaft here. You want to size these 2 surfaces against the bushings in the sun shaft that's going to come up later. Sun gear shaft. All right. Let's get this piece going, though. All right, so you can tell the end that you need because there's a groove for the ring, and it's also a wider surface, right? So we're going to take this like this. We're going to put it in here. We're going to work him in here until we have access to where the ring goes. And then we're just going to pop our ring in. That's all this step is. Keep your finger on top of the ring so it doesn't go flying. Use a smaller kind of snap ring plier for a little ring like this. hung up on the teeth of the gear right there. There we go. All right. Just make sure it's seated all the way around. Got a little bit of a breeze coming through here, messing up the page that we're on. All right, next up we've got this bearing assembly. And if you watch the disassembly video, you'd know that this also has a part that's not shown. This particular year has the spacer 691. So it's not shown in the diagram, but we're going to have to install it, or reinstall it rather. And then here's our original 66345 bearing assembly. So we made a mark. This faces the transfer case is blue, yellow faces the torque converter. So now we have, yellow faces the transfer case, blue faces the torque converter. So now we know the orientation. We've got our new one here, which is a GM 242-08-848. The service manual mentions that we should be using the trans gel to hold the bearing and races together. So we'll separate these three pieces out here. 1, 2, 3. And all they're really talking about doing is just kind of packing this bearing up here. You don't have to use a whole lot here. I probably used more than I should, but just when this guy first starts up, you want him to have some lubrication, and you want this whole assembly to stay together, right? We're going to put some on the outside as well. And we're going to take this little guy here, put some on the outside. This guy goes on there. This guy goes on there. All right, the next step is they want us to take this assembly and put it into the output carrier. So we've got our output carrier all cleaned up and reassembled, or restored rather. Some of these bags out of the way. All right, and so this guy is going to go straight down here. What's going to happen is these teeth are going to engage those teeth. So what we're going to do to help that is we got to find our little ATF spritzer. All right, we just want to come in here and spritz those gears down and spritz this area inside with Dexron 6. Right, just want to make sure we get it all the way in there. Okay, now we can sit this guy in our little hole here. It's a bearing surface, so we're going to spritz that up. And then they want us to put in part 669, 47, and 48. All right, here's our original bearing setup, 669, 47, and 48, with 47 being the bearing and 48 and 69 being the races. Right, so it's a setup like this. And this side faces the transfer case, and this side would face the torque converter. We're going to replace that with an 862-3922 kit. I've already taken the liberty of greasing this guy up. Well, no, I thought I did. I guess I didn't. We'll go ahead and do that now. Just going to take the bearing and transgel him up. This is just to hold things together, but it's also to give it some lubrication for that initial start before we get the pressure up on the fluid itself. All right, so this guy's going to go down in this position, that little lip up, just the way we saw here. That little lip faces the back. And then we'll be able to put our output shaft on, sight him on top of that, and then we'll continue on with this piece here, right? So we're going to end up putting our output shaft on top of that, and then we'll end up putting this thrust washer, and then we're going to have this ring. All right, and now we're going to drop the output shaft onto this. Now when I have a bushing, I also like to put a little trans gel on it. And then you're going to try to get these teeth lined up. That's going to sit down just like that, unless you haven't dressed your bushing properly. And then we're going to take a 673 thrust washer, or spacer rather. I think this is just a plastic. Yeah, it is a thrust washer. It's a plastic thrust washer and a 672 retaining ring, right? So there's our old 672 ring. It's going to be replaced by a 862-6173. And again, when you see these red lines to the reference number, that means this part is recently discontinued, unfortunately. And then we're going to put our 673 part on there. And our 673 part is another discontinued number. It can either be an 862-6372 or a more recent number, 242-41242. Our original one, the reason we're replacing it, the original one here, you can see that the material on it that's plated is wore through, so it's just a lot of wear. We probably could have reused it for a stock rebuild like this, but anything that's wear type of part, we've gone ahead and replaced. And again, this is a trans gel type of deal, both to help lubricate it for initial start as well as just to hold it together. These tangs go in the holes, just like that. All right, let's get this ring on. We can do it by hand, I believe. Just watch out we don't get our finger pinched. We use a tool right here at the end. All right, yep. Now we got, just make sure it's seated all the way in, and we're done with that piece. All right, what's next? Okay, so now we're going to turn this guy over in the other direction. We're going to continue with this assembly. So we're going to go, let's see. So we're not using this tool, by the way. We're just using a piece of wood with a hole. But if you want to have a J611601 and a vise, that's what the shop manual is talking about. All right, we're going to lubricate the reaction drum carrier pinion gears with Dexron. I'm going to do that right now. Just going to spritz them up, spin them around, and spritz them up. And again, this is just to get things lubed up for the first initial start. We're going to go ahead while we're in here, and we're going to spritz these teeth. Okay. And then we're going to go and get the reaction drum and carrier, and we're going to slide that in along with 659, which is a carrier thrust washer. And then we'll be ready to slide our sun gear inside here along with our sun gear shaft. All right, here's our old part 659, which is the plastic thrust washer. Even though the service manual mentioned plastic earlier, the other one was metal. This one is plastic on our model, and it gets replaced by a 242-14809. Right, this guy sits in here, these little nubs. Now the old one had 4 nubs. The new one only has 2. It still sits in the same place, just like that. All right, and now we've got our cleaned and restored 651 drum and carrier assembly. All right, so that they want us to put on top, so we're going to place that on top. What we're going to want to do here is these planetary gears. We're going to want to give them a spritz. I forgot to do that. Okay. Now these will engage with this ring gear here. All right, now that we got that in there, we got another bearing assembly to put in. So 47 and 48 is a race and a bearing, and then the other race goes on the center support, and then there's 642, which is a brass thrust washer, right? So they're going to want us to put those pieces together. But before we get there, we've still got a couple more here. We've got 650, which is our sun gear. And they want us to make sure we insert the chamfered inner diameter first. So this side is beveled flush. Right, you can see how this side is chamfered. This side is beveled flush. This side is chamfered. And we also marked this, right, with this direction here, with the blue facing towards the torque converter, so we know that the chamfered side is what goes in. Right, so that guy's in. And then we've got 649, which is our sun gear shaft. Right, and they show in the picture here how this band faces down. You've got your two bushings on either end. And what we're going to do, since we've got some bushings, whenever we have bushings, I like to give them a little extra help on startup. It's going to be a smooth fit here because we got new ones. All right, now that's in place. And now we can move on to this bearing assembly. So here's our original one, 648, 47, and 646, 47, 48 rather, and that gets replaced by a kit 862, 39, 20. I've already transgelled this particular assembly up inside, just to speed up some things, right? So what they want you to do is, they tell you here, assemble the longer lipped center support thrust bearing race onto the sun gear shaft, number 648, and then assemble the center support thrust bearing onto the bearing race. And then assemble the thrust bearing race 646 to the rear hub of the center support. So basically they want you to take this apart just to make sure it's going to go together okay. Stick this on separately to the center support. So this guy we're going to go ahead and just drop in. And then we're going to grab our center support. And what they're wanting you to make sure you do here is position this one like that. That's all they're talking about there. And again, we're going to want to lube up anything that might be a surface that's going to have friction. Against a bushing or a bearing. Bushings and bearings get transgel. Right, so we're just going to go inside this center support here. Get some inside here. And then we're just going to grab our brass thrust washer and put these two together. All right, our original 642 is right here. We're going to replace that with a 24, 24, 14, 14. So one of those you want to make sure you're not bending anything. And again, since it's a type of bearing, we're going to give it some transgel. And that's, by the way, that's exactly what the service manual says. Retain the thrust washer with J36850, which is transgel. All right, so we're just going to drop this guy right down in there. And now we're ready to put the center support on top of this guy, but we got one more piece we need to add that the service manual doesn't talk about. So we took out our original roller, 644, and we're going to replace that with a 24290162. This is just along that common theme where anything that is a bushing or a bearing that we replace. And we're going to spritz this up as well. Now with that done, Now we can do the step here that says install a new center support or the reconditioned center support into the reaction carrier. Verify correct assembly by holding the carrier drum stationary and rotating the center support. It should only turn counterclockwise. So we'll take this guy. And again, we've got a surface here that we want to put some assembly lubrication on. All right. All right, so it should turn counterclockwise, but should not turn clockwise, and it doesn't. All right, so we're good. At this point, we're ready to put it inside the transmission. So if you have a J6129 handle and a J38868 tool, you can do that. I do not. I'm going to show you a different tool that I'll be using. Let me go grab it, and we'll put this guy in, and we'll line it up inside the case. All right, the tool I'm going to be using is just this very simple tool, again, from BET Performance. It sits right in like that and allows us to pick this guy up, right? Pretty cheap, does the job. Now, first thing I'm going to do before I get this over is we're going to want to put some transgel where the case bushing is going to mate up to this guy. Just ease that assembly and ease that initial startup. All right, and then let's walk over to the case. All right, guys, something else I want to point out here. Here's your center support bolt hole. As we put this into the transmission, as you look at the teeth that are cut into here, you'll notice that one is not like the others. This guy here, that's at an angle. This is an indexing one. So if you come up a little bit from the camera from the top down, you can see it's kind of angled. When I put this in, watch how it lines up with the notched mark on the case. All right, guys, we're going to put this into the case now. She is heavy, but you watch how I position that angled tooth here. Right, so you want this angled tooth on this side of this angled part of the case. So at this point, we're ready to put in our beveled ring here. All right, guys, now we got the center support seated in there. We need to install the 633 retaining ring. Now, this ring is different than all the others. It's very thick. I'll put my hand in here and make sure it can focus while we zoom in. And it's beveled on one edge. Right, so you can see there's a bevel on this leading edge. The flat side is going to go against the center support, and the beveled side is going to face up towards the torque converter. And again, it's going to go in the 9 o'clock position. And again, to remind you, the 9 o'clock position with the pan at the bottom at 6 o'clock and the top peak of the bell housing at 12 o'clock, that 9 o'clock position is referenced by just looking at this lug where the 2-1 manual band seats. That's going to help you always know where that is. Now, I'm not going to be able to get this in here with the camera, so we'll get it started, and then I'll bring you back while we fully seat it. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get it fully seated in here. Now, she should just pop right in all the way around. Just like this. And you should end up, when you're done, if you got this right, with about an inch gap on this side. Or more. You know, preferably a little more. It should be a number in that neighborhood. So this kind of ring, it doesn't actually seat all the way to the wall because the groove cut for it in these lugs only goes so far, and it's also a very tight fit. So this is actually just fine. Now, this ring's discontinued, right? So if you have a hard time finding a replacement, you can always reuse the old one in this situation when it's discontinued, or you can choose to go aftermarket on this particular part. If it doesn't fit, things to check. One of the 3 bearing assemblies is backwards. That could be a problem. You could also have a problem where your selective thrust washer at the back is too big. One of those 4 things also could be that the bushing that you installed in the output shaft is not recessed enough, so it's pushing up against the bearing assembly. Any one of those things could throw this off where it won't fit in all the way. But if you got it like this, then you're ready to move on to building the intermediate. All right, so we can see there's our center support threads. Hopefully this light's getting in there for you guys to see that that's correctly lined up the way we want it to so that the bolt's going to fit. We got some final adjustments to do with a tool that we're going to stick into here or here, before we put in the cooler line fitting. But at this point, we're ready to start the rear end play adjustment. All right, after we get the 633 ring in, we need to do this rear unit end play check again. You remember we did this initially when we did the disassembly video. So you're going to set up a dial indicator on the rear, and we're going to check to see if we're getting between either 0.127 and 0.635 millimeters or 5 to 25 thousandths of an inch. If you don't have the correct end play, that's when you're going to change out those selective thrust washers that we showed in part 1. So let's take a look at what our end play is over here. So here's our setup. Same orientation as during the disassembly video. Just going to zero this guy out. I like to get a little tension on him and zero him out so I can be sure he's really at 0. And then this kind of angle, I got gravity helping take the slack out. So now when I pull on it, I'm getting about 12 thousandths. Push it back in. And so we didn't have it in all the way the first time, so we'll do this again. Should be about 12 thousandths. 13. All right, so 13 thousandths, which is within our specification. So we're good. Let's move on to the next step. So the next step is going to be putting in our new center support bolt and reinstalling our cooler pipe fitting. Now they talk about having this J23093 tool that's going to stick into one of the holes next to where the bolt goes in. And they're suggesting you use that tool to push the center support splines against the case splines inside, just so that you get it in and lined up perfectly for this bolt. I don't have this tool. I'm just going to improvise with something else that fits in there. And then we're going to get that bolt in there, and we're going to torque him down to 32 foot-pounds. After we get that done, we're going to put our cooler pipe fitting back on and torque it to 26 foot-pounds. Remember that there's an O-ring here. Now I'm going to replace that with a new part, 24233367. That's got the O-ring already built into it, and it's got the little clip inside built into it. And if you remember from the disassembly video, we took the other one off too, and we're going to replace that as well, 1912-5677. That's the smaller guy. Again, new clip installed. We have our original ones here, and you could certainly reuse these if you wanted to. These were just heavily corroded, and we want to just proactively replace them to avoid leaks. If you do end up reusing them, you need to replace these little clips that you popped out during the initial pulling of the transmission. And those clips should come in your rebuild kit. They do in the GM kit, but if they don't for some reason, it's a 2420-5103 to get you a couple more of these replacement clips. All right, let's go ahead and get these pieces installed. All right, guys, this is the location of the center support bolt hole. And these are the 2 ports they were talking about that you could stick that tool in. I'm just going to take a brass punch, and I'm just going to make sure that we don't have any slack on this. Trying to make sure this guy is pushed back so that we can get our bolt started into our threads here. Going to be using a 12-point SAE 3/8 socket to get it going. And again, this is a reconditioned center support that you saw me do in part 1. We'll just take it in with the hand ratchet part way, and then we'll torque it after we get the cooler line fitting installed. This guy down here, she's starting to get a little tight. All right, we'll finish it up with the torque wrench. Now we're going to come over on this side. Now if you look inside this port here, you can see the seal where we installed it on the center support. We already put a little bit of ATF on there to lube this guy up. Get this guy in there. The shorter one goes up on the front here. And they come, if you're using the new ones, they already have some thread sealant on them. And we will torque those 2 fittings up to 26 foot-pounds with a 19 millimeter, and we'll torque our center support bolt up to 32 foot-pounds. All right, after we get these guys torqued down, and again, that's 26 foot-pounds on here, and again, make sure you get a little bit of ATF on the O-ring so it doesn't go in dry. Now we're going to do the intermediate clutch. So we've got part 630 here somewhere. There we go, all cleaned up and restored and ready to install. And then we've got a set of frictions and steels and a wave plate. The wave plate is 684. Here's our replacement one. And again, this is another discontinued part, 24204497. And then in a GM rebuild kit, so you'll get new frictions. So part 631, those are 4 frictions. If we wanted to know what part number they were, we'd jump over here and check our reference illustration and take a look here, and we see it's a 24202966. We look in our pack and we see we've got 4 24202966s in this particular package. So these would be our new GM frictions. Now what you won't see in here are steels, because on a GM rebuild you do not replace the steels, at least unless they're burned out, scored, or damaged. You're supposed to reuse them. And so we've got our 4 632 parts here, all cleaned up and restored and ready to reinstall. All right, so when you take a look at the instructions, dip all the plates in Dexron 3. We're going to be using 6. Install the wave plate first. Install the intermediate plates in an alternating fashion, starting with the steel. So 4 steel and 4 composite or friction. Install the intermediate clutch backing plate with the flat side down. Now, older years, there'd be a little depression like you see in the picture. But on this 99, it's flat on both sides, although we did indicate yellow for down and blue for up. We'll put it back the way we found it. So these pieces don't get dipped. All of these pieces do get dipped. All I'm going to do for that is I'm going to put some AC Delco Dexron 6 in this little plastic container, and we're going to pop each one in, and then we're going to shift the camera over to the transmission. I'll show you putting them in. I don't necessarily show dipping, stuff like that. All right, guys, just a quick view of our little dipping station here, right? You don't need to let this stuff soak. It's not porous. You just want to get it coated. So I'm going to move the camera over inside here, and then we're just going to start loading these pieces up. So the first guy to go in is going to be our wave plate. And then we're going to put steel in. And then we're going to put a friction in, and then we're just going to keep alternating just like this until we get everything in. So we'll come back when we get to the last piece with the backing plate. All right, last friction. Now when you start getting all this stuff in here, you're going to end up at some point having drips out the bottom. So you're going to get your pan back in just like when you took it apart. All right, this plate's going to go in this kind of 9 o'clock orientation, right? We can just get it lined up properly. There we go. And then the next thing to go in here is going to be our 629 retaining ring, which is going to be an AC Delco 8623149. And that's going to hold our intermediate clutch in position. And again, the open part of the ring is going to go in this 9 o'clock position. Let's see if we can knock this one out by hand here. Get our little screwdriver installation tool. There we go. Now we're done with that piece. Let's see what's next. All right, guys, we got our 629 ring in the 9 o'clock position. Now we move into another test to make sure things have the appropriate free play. So intermediate clutch piston travel check, feeler gauge between the clutch backing plate and the clutch retaining ring that we just installed. We want to make sure we're between 40 thousandths and 107 thousandths. We'll do that, and then the next thing we're going to do is a manual 2-1 band install. So we're going to drop the 2-1 band in here, part 628. Into the case, and I'll show you where that goes on the anchor pin or the anchor lug. Here's our old one. Part 628, and this is another one of these things that's kind of subjective. This particular band doesn't get used a lot unless you're manually shifting. So the only reason I decided to do it was the composite material is kind of flaking off on the edges just from age. And I figure, well, you know, while I'm in here, why not? So we'll replace that with a 2422 8967. That's going to look like this. So same setup as our original one. All right, so let's go do that piston travel check. So inside here, don't do it in the 9 o'clock position because there's too much flex in the retaining ring. You want to do it in one of these other positions. But you want to come in here with your feeler gauge. I don't think I'm blocking your view. Maybe I am. I'll have to get out of the way then. You want to come in here and make sure you can get within specification between the top of the backing plate and that retaining ring. In my case, it's what, 30, 59, 69, 79, plus 5 more, 84 thousandths. All right, let's get this manual 2-1 band in here. So if you look down the case wall, you can see there's the lug that's pressed into the case right there. And directly opposite towards the bottom where the pan side is, there's a hole here, and that's where the pin for the 2-1 servo would come through and actuate this band. So on the band, this piece here that's spot welded on the end, this goes over the lug, and this little depression here is what the pin catches. So we're going to slide this guy in to the case. We're going to get that round piece up there onto that lug. If I can get my fingers out of the way. And then we're going to get this piece sitting right where the pin is going to be able to grab it. And what you want to look for here, this thing will straighten itself out when we get the rest of the clutches in here. But you want to make sure that this is well seated on that lug, and this is sitting on this shelf here so that it can be pushed in. In fact, we're going to leave it just like that. That's about the best position we can do until we get the other pieces installed. All right, guys, next up is assembling the direct clutch. Part 623 and seal 622 is the lip seal here, and they show you the orientation. They also tell you to make sure that the direct clutch intermediate seal with the lip, install it with the lip facing upward. And when they say upward, they mean the orientation of the picture. So here's our 623 direct clutch, all cleaned up and restored and ready to go. Here's our original 622. I'm going to reach in our bag here, get our replacement 622. And then we want to take a look at where this lip is, right there. And we want to have this facing in this direction. Never have too much lubrication for this sort of thing. As you put it in, just make sure it doesn't get twisted on you. There we go, and there's the lip. You can see right there. Zoom in. You want to be able to see that lip curling back right like that. All right, now the next thing they tell you to do is install a couple of tools. A J21-362-1 and a 38-731-1. We're not going to use either of those. I'm going to use another aftermarket tool from BET Performance. This guy's going to slip on right on top here. And that's going to help us get our bonded piston in. So these bonded pistons, like 619 here, you can technically reuse them, but this is a vehicle with close to 300,000 miles, and I view this as a seal. So we're just going to go ahead and replace it with the 2420-4961, which is a new replacement bonded piston. Right? When they say bonded, it's that the seal piece is just made onto the piston. So there's a seal here and a seal here. So we are going to spritz this guy up as well. And we're going to spritz this guy up as well. And then we're going to slide these two together. Now, not having the other tool will probably make this job a little bit more difficult. I'm not sure if we're hung on the outside as much as we're hung up on the middle, but no, there, she just dropped. She just dropped. She got our tool caught. All right, we're just gonna give her a little bit of a spritz as we go around to where she's stuck. It's usually just one side, or one piece of one side, that you'll get hung up on. There we go. All right, now with that out of the way, we can take 607, which is our spring assembly, and then we'll need a new 608 retaining ring, which is a GM862 3105. And we're going to have to get our spring compressor aftermarket deal over here to do that. Now they again tell you can use the J23327 and the J25018A adapter, little mousetrap kind of deal, but we're going to keep using our aftermarket Amazon thing to do this. Just get this guy up here and we're just going to compress him down around the edge so that we can get in far enough to drop this snap ring into that groove right there. All right, let's get this guy compressed down. And again, you know, it doesn't take a lot of force. Too much force, you could bend or damage the spring assembly. But in this one, you just want to make sure it's centered before you start cranking it down. And as soon as you can see the groove, you don't need to give it any more force. See if we can get it in with this tool. Always keep your finger around these guys in the back. So you don't pop off. Like that. He would have went flying if I didn't have my finger there. Let me see if this tool is a little better for this particular angle. I guess the one advantage of the GM tool is you'd have more clearance to do what we're trying to do right now. The aftermarket tool just doesn't really have that. And the problem we've got here is you've got these little nubs that are preventing our ring from seating. Crank it down just a little bit more. See if that helps us with seating this guy. Nope. Not sure how to get past that clearance problem. Guess we can prise him in a little bit. So the problem we've got here is the little nub on this side is holding our ring up. Won't let it get seated in the groove. Just trying to see if I can coax it around that. Just a hair. There we go. We've got it in all the way except right in that little groove area right there. There, jeez. Yeah, so you just got to make sure you can get it to sit right in between these little nubs. Okay, with that done, she's in position and we can move on to the next step. All right, time for some more dipping. We got to now build up the clutch pack that goes inside here. So we have part 617, which is the backing plate. All restored and ready to install. There's a 609 wave plate that we're going to be replacing, and a 616 retaining ring that we're going to be replacing. As usual, when you see these R's, it means I'm going to replace them. We've got, looks like 4 frictions, part 611 that we're going to be replacing. And then we've got 4 steels, or 5 steels that we're going to be reusing. All right, and the parts we'll be replacing that with is our wave plate we're going to replace with a 2420-5560 GM. Go ahead and get that out. And our retaining ring we're going to replace with an 862-3112. This replaces our 616 retaining ring. It's going to go on top. All right, so the way this is going to work is we're going to put the wave plate in first, and again, very similar to earlier, we're going to dip all the clutches, and we're going to dip the steels as well in Dextron ATF. We're going to install the wave plate first. We're going to install the direct clutch plates 618 and 619. Actually, that looks like a typo. It should be 611. So we're going to start with the steel plate first, and then composite, and then we're going to alternate. We're going to end up on top with a steel, and then we're going to put the backing plate on, and then we'll put 616 on there to hold it all together. All right, so this guy, there's no particular orientation on these. Just get that guy in there. We're just going to start dipping these in. Even though there's no particular orientation, we'll try to keep it consistent how we do it. All right, and I forgot to mention our frictions. So our frictions are going to be this 2420-02646 part. There's 10 of them in here. We're obviously not going to use all of them here, but the same one is used in multiple places. Get out the ones we need. Just make sure real quick that we grab the right one. We did. And then we're just going to do this same dipping for each one of these. I'm just going to keep alternating back and forth. Now, I know a lot of times people like to replace the steels if they're heated to the point where they've got warpage type damage, then yeah, you should do that. But if not, there's no need. At least according to the service manual from General Motors. Again, the stock rebuild, right? If he's doing a performance rebuild, be a different set of considerations. So I'm going to keep going here until we get to the top, and we'll come back. All right, guys, last of our frictions. And now our backing plate. See, our backing plate's flat on one side, then it's got this ridge on this top piece. We're going to put the flat side towards the friction material. And we'll put our new ring in. Let's see if we can get this in without having to go grab any tools. Yeah, come on, baby. Come on, there you go. All right. My hands are getting slippery with the ATF on here. There we go. All right, that piece is done. Now we're going to flip it over, and since it's probably going to have some excess fluid leak out, we'll probably just sit it over our drain pan here for a little bit. But what we're going to continue on is we're going to flip it over, and we're going to put this 626, 625, 624 pieces on top of 623, and then we're going to seal the whole thing with a special kind of snap ring that twists on. And we're going to be using the J38695 because that's the best tool to get that type of ring on, and then we're going to install it in the case. All right, so we're going to put our bottom 624, right? So it's got like a little cup opening. That over there. And then we would have put our roller clutch in here, 624, but again, it's a bearing type part, so we're going to replace it with an 863 3173. Which looks like this. I'm just going to give this guy some spritzing. And actually, I didn't realize that the replacement one comes with new top and bottom pieces. So we'll just use the whole thing as a unit. So we'll take off the used one, and we'll just drop the whole thing on as an assembly, like so. All right, and then we're going to take 625, all cleaned up, restored, ready to reuse. And they're telling you one side's perfectly flat, and the other side has some grooves cut in it. And plus we paint marked it that this is what faces the rear. Actually, I got our little top piece cockeyed on us here. I want to make sure we lube up the inside before we try to put this on. And we lube up around the bottom. All right, so this is going to slide around the outside edge of that. All right, guys, sorry about that little glitch on the camera here. We got a breeze. I had to reposition some stuff. So we were right here with putting this sprag piece on, or this roller clutch rather, and now we're trying to put this race on. And so the key to this, if we take a swing over here at the service manual, the key is we got to make sure ridges are up, and you're only trying to turn it in a clockwise direction. Use clockwise rotating motion, right? It can't go counterclockwise. It's got to go clockwise. And sometimes this can be a real bear to get on. But we'll try it like this first. If we don't have much luck, I'll show you a different way. I'm probably just going to jump to the other way. And so the other way says, take this off and put it on the race first, and then install the race onto 623. So we're going to do that. So make sure we got these two pieces tightly on here. And then we're going to do it like this. And this piece is fragile, right? So, you don't want to force anything with these little rollers, particularly since, in my case, we're replacing it in the first place to get a new one. We definitely want to treat it gently. Get all these guys in the race evenly. Just got to watch what you're doing here, so nothing gets bent or cocked. All right, so now everything's kind of happy. Now what we'll try and do is we'll try to get it on this way. We're just going to try to make sure we go in the direction we want it to land in. All right, there we go. And so the whole idea here is this goes in this direction, but not in this direction. If it goes opposite, you know, the thing will burn out in just a couple of miles, more than likely. All right. I'm just not totally happy with whether it's fully seated or not. Yep, it is. Okay, so what I'm looking down here is I'm just making sure that the bottom of the race is flush against the top of 623. All right, now we can open up our 626 retainer, and we can fit him into these two notch grooves here, and that's going to leave us with just enough space to put the retaining ring in. You can see there's like a little cutout for what would be a snap ring, although this particular guy does not get a snap ring. So if you remember, this guy gets 627 in the disassembly video, and this guy is like a slinky, right? It's like this, like a spiral deal. And we're going to replace that with a new GM part, 867-5558. And then taking a look at the service manual over here on this step, install the roller clutch retainer ring onto the direct clutch housing hub and use J38695 to complete the installation, rotating counterclockwise while pressing down. All right, so that's what this guy looks like, J38695. So you actually start this by hand. I like to get it into one of the notches first. And just kind of walk it around. Just make sure you're not bending it, not putting any excessive force on it. And when you're trying to get it around, you're opening it up. You're not pulling up on it. All right, so now we're ready for the tool to lock it into place. You can hear it click as you turn this tool counterclockwise. And then when you're done, this guy will all be locked into place, right? So you just want to go around, you want to make sure everything is under where you want it to be. Just make sure it goes this time, one more time here, just to make sure it's squeezing it all the way under. All right, yeah, I feel like that's a little better. All right, now we're ready to install it. Now if we look over here, the next step here talked about the direct clutch installation, and they talked about having a J24396 and using this to align the intermediate clutch plates, and you can also put compressed air through the center support bolt hole in order to get that lined up. And what they're talking about there is these notches on this race have got to fit into the teeth of the frictions on the intermediate clutch. So let's go over to the transmission and show what we're talking about. All right, so here's our tool, J24396. And all this tool is you got a round circle here with a ridge, and then you've got a notch stamped into it. And the purpose of this is to help line up the teeth on the friction. So if we look down here in the intermediate clutch, you can see these guys are all a mishmash right now. And so you can do a couple of things. You can put this tool in, and you can just kind of wiggle it around like this until it seats, right? And that's kind of like what it does. The other thing you can do is, if it's still not working for you, or it's got a little bit of a tightness to it, you can take air, 40 psi, and we'll come down here on the front, right, and see where we have our center support bolt hole. Right? And you can put air into that hollow bolt. And watch what happens up here with these clutches, these frictions rather, with the clutch when we do this. When we apply this, like when we tested it and we did the center support, it's going to go ahead and activate that piston. Right? So this whole thing is going to lift up. And so one of the things you can do is you can use this to keep those guys tight. Right? So once you get them where you want them, you can keep them tight, and then you can insert the direct clutch assembly in there. So now to get this guy in, if we flip around here, now the service manual talks about this tool. J38733 is basically a holder to drop this guy in. And if you got that, great. That's, in my opinion, that's an optional tool. This tool we just looked at is a nice-to-have tool. You can get away without it. Now that you've seen what it does, you can probably improvise something. This just makes it a lot easier, in my opinion, but it's not a must-have tool. This is definitely an optional tool. You just need a way to pick this up. And the way I pick these up is just take a couple of S-hooks with some heavy-duty wire, and you're going to hook it in the same place that tool would hook it, and that's going to let you pick this guy up. No problemo. Let's go over and get him inserted into the transmission. All right, so with our tool telling us that everything is lined up, we should be able to drop her in. Let's hook on our little hooks. We'll bring her over and set her inside. Felt it fall on a couple. 2, 3, 4, 5. When you hear that tapping kind of sound, you can be sure you're on there. But another thing that we're going to do here is we're going to do a test with some 40 psi of air through the center support bolt hole again, right there. Okay, if you come up here, what we're going to be looking for is we want to make sure that this direct isn't getting lifted by the intermediate. All right, so it's not moving, so I'm satisfied that that is in position. So now we have a couple more things to go do. All right, guys, we got one test to do before we call this done and move on. So you can see this setup I've got with the dowel caliper. We've got it situated down here. You're going to watch the mirror, and I'll show you the test, and I'll tell you what the test is. So about 0.90. I've done this test a few times. I'm getting anywhere from 90 thousandths to 95 thousandths. So what is this test? Well, I'm coming in over here, and to the left of the center support bolt, there's a port here. And I've just made an adapter because I don't really have a fitting here. I've got a couple of different airline rubber fittings, but none of them can clear the valve body properly. So I grabbed one of our adapters off of the cooler cleaner that we'll use when we get ready to put this back on. Put a little piece of rubber hose as a gasket, and we got it wedged in there to make a nice airtight seal. And then we can come in here like this and run this test. Let me go show you in the service manual what this test is. All right, so we put the direct clutch in, and we got it lowered into the unit. And this last test we just did was this direct clutch piston check, piston travel check, right? So what we're trying to see is not whether the clutches move, but the piston moves. So we run the dowel caliper down through one of the holes in the spring assembly to make contact with the piston. We apply 80 psi in this case because what we've got to do is we've got to run air all the way up through the center support and into this direct clutch to move this piston. It's got a much stronger spring, so we need to double our psi to 80. And we're going to run it. They don't tell you in here, so I showed you it's on the left-hand side. and then that's how you can actuate this. And you can see it. I use this little adapter here, and they want to make sure that the piston travel is between 50 thousandths and 172 thousandths, and we measured between 88 and 90 thousandths. I've done this test, like I said, about 4 or 5 times, and I'm getting anywhere from 88 to 92 thousandths. So we're within specification, and we're ready to move on to the forward clutch. But at this point, guys, we're done with part 2. I'm going to call it at this point because it's getting kind of long, and we'll pick it up with the forward clutch in part 3. If you've got questions or comments, leave them below. And if you made it this far and you found something useful or entertaining about this, go ahead and hit the like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.